Perhaps one of the most haunting sermon titles I've ever heard is from about 20 years ago in college. I remember it. Rusty preached a sermon. It was entitled, "Grace Makes Some Folks Grumble." It's true. Hadn't changed. Grace makes some folks grumble. Workers in the vineyard is really how it is, or some people have suggested that a proper heading for this parable might be the generous landowner instead of the workers in the vineyard, which we often know. But this passage today from Matthew reminds us of the story of the workers in the vineyard. It tells a story that many of us have heard over and over and over again, and yet the more we hear it, the more we need to hear it oftentimes. Grapes in the vineyard, once they are ripe, they need to come in now. You can't wait 2 or 3 days, or, kind of like us packing up the yard sale down the fellowship hall. It can't wait till we get to it. They're going to go bad if they're not off the grapevine. So the owner of the vineyard, goes down to the marketplace, looks for people to help work, calls in a few, goes back 3 hours later, calls in a few more, goes in again 3 hours later, goes in, calls in more. And then at 3 o'clock and then at 5 o'clock, they come in to the vineyard to work. It's a little bit odd, but these are parables. These are not necessarily stories of things that actually took place. These are kind of stories that we tell to help illustrate an idea and an understanding. So this one, it is kind of odd. The owner of the vineyard, he's got a manager who will pay them, but he goes and picks out his own help. That's kind of odd. If you have a manager to pay, it looks like we'd have a manager for the vineyard. And yet, in this story, the owner of the vineyard is the one that goes to find the workers. Got to thinking about that a little bit. I always remember in elementary school when we would divide up and pick teams. Somebody would be the captain here and somebody else would be the captain there, and then everybody would stand in a group and they would pick one and pick two and pick, dodgeball or something like that, or softball or whatever we were going to play. I have many talents. Sports are not them. So I can kind of identify with getting picked a little bit toward the end. They were all right. And I just tried to stay out of the way. It's most of the time worked, except for that time in 5th grade football when I got the ball and took off running and nobody was chasing me, and I realized I was going the entirely wrong direction. That's the last time I played football. It's okay. I like it for the commercials. Not a problem. But they're workers. They're there. And the vineyard is ready for harvest. And so it's time to get more help and more help and more help. And they worked, and the last ones that came on for only an hour before pay time, they showed up to get paid first. And they were given the full day's wage instantaneously. So the ones that saw that from the morning were like, oh, we done hit pay dirt. We're going to make it good. And they get paid, and it's the very same wage as everybody else. Franz de Waal, a psychologist and primate studier, conducted a study with monkeys, and he had them assemble and group items together in a group. And so when they completed it, the monkeys were all given bananas as a reward. And one group of monkeys were given this huge pile of bananas, and the other group were given smaller amount of bananas, and the other group was given a smaller amount of bananas, and the last group was given just a single banana. And so they decided to conduct the survey once again. And so the monkeys that just got a little bit of the bananas refused to even participate in the game. They're just like, I'm left out. Our culture somehow has a way of teaching us how to quest to do good and succeed and to gain more. I don't know, maybe it's perhaps on the Puritan understanding of the founding of America. The harder you work, the more you'll get. Maybe it's the Calvinist understanding of part of the way that we realize that God has chosen to bless us is the resources that we hold? Maybe. You've got to do good. You've got to succeed. You've got to be smart. You've got to be at the first of the class. You've got to be the first one to work, the last one to leave. You have got to do it all to be successful. That's the way it seems sometimes, except in stories like this. And maybe perhaps in faith. Maybe perhaps part of this happens to do with just this good old-fashioned envy that's in our lives. We're envious of what other people have, what other people get, what other people do. They've got their life together, and here is me. Oftentimes, it seems like that we're happier to watch someone else's misery than we are to celebrate their successes and their joys and their winnings in their lives. They've just got it so good, and we just got it bad. Doesn't matter what we do, can't get ahead, it doesn't matter. We're good at realizing how bad we have it and how great everybody else around us have it. I say that with studies have shown that folks who regularly look at Facebook or what was formerly known as Twitter or some of those social media apps often experience more rates of depression or mental health issues than those who just completely, delete the apps. I think about that too. I mean, there are people that are on my friends on Facebook, and they have an exciting life. Let me tell you. I'm like, oh my gosh, how do you even get the laundry done? You're gone so much. How do you do it? How do you do that? Or they make a cake and it looks like it comes out of Southern Living magazine instead of their oven. I spend a couple hours getting the oven where I can find it again. Well, maybe not 2 hours, but anyway, you know what I mean. They have these gorgeous flowers that are just unfolding, and it doesn't matter what I do, mine will get 3 blooms. Maybe that's just saying that's enough. It does. But we got to realize that oftentimes when we see that stuff around us, it's just like, watching TV and how wonderful everything else is all around us. That those who post stuff often post the very best of their life. Growing up, when we would head from home to Winston to Stratford Road or whatever, I would love to ride through Buena Vista. If you haven't been through Buena Vista, you ought to go sometime. But if you haven't, maybe you've been through the Greensboro Country Club. Where those houses that are big as this church building, they just kind of go on and on and on. And I guess that's part of imagination. We look into that house and we realize how beautiful that must be. Pull the Rolls Royce into the big old garage with 6 cars there. And everything's just perfect on the outside. I don't know, perhaps it's a mature level of maturity when we realize that all that glitters on the outside is never gold around. Somebody was reminding me of a wedding I went to that was on top of a hill one dusty summer. And it was a beautiful place overlooking the mountains, just these rolling hills and just beautiful sun. I was there in my Navy suit. I was looking cool and stylish. And then I looked down on it, and my suit is glistening from the sun because of the quartz and the fool's gold that was on the road up there, because we were riding on a horse trailer hooked behind a pickup truck. Man, I was shimmering to the nines, and yet it was just fool's gold. Didn't mean anything. In fact, my suit had to go to the cleaners. I was a little bit aggravated. It's all right, but what I thought, what I saw, and what I was there for was 2 totally different things. But all that glitters is never really gold. We have to remind ourselves of that oftentimes. We are, in our culture, really taught to be this competitive spirit about us. To want to do best, to get more than the other people, to know more, to do more. And yet, we're people of faith. Part of what we do when following after Jesus is realizing that God's grace is sufficient for us. I love that. You know, the teacher, they gave a test. It's not your class's answer, it's your answer that you've got to put on the test. God's grace is sufficient for us. I think that may be part of what the story is trying to exemplify. It doesn't matter how much grace you have, you've got enough. It doesn't matter when you get the grace, you've had enough. It doesn't matter what the grace needs to be in your life, you've got enough. It's all the same for everybody. In fact, there's a part of us that, for some of us who've been around as persons of faith for a little longer, maybe perhaps instead of looking at the people who get the grace at the end of their life, need to realize that the joy that comes is part of our experience of following after Christ, of working in God's vineyard in the world. That too is a joy. Sometimes it's harder than others, but it's a joy to be able to follow after Christ, to be able to be Christ's people in the world, to do the work of God in the world. That is part of the joy. That is part of the reward. That is part of the blessing. God's grace given to us whenever we need it most. Yeah, you know, there are things that I'm pretty good at. There are things that you're pretty good at. I guarantee you that no two of us would do the very same thing the very same way with the very same capabilities. If I tried to play the piano like Robert or Susan or any of the rest of you that can play the piano, it would not be pretty. But they are absolutely beautiful playing the piano. It gladdens my heart and thrills my soul. That's what it is. We celebrate the goodness that they have been given. And we take it and we soak it in and let it shape and touch our lives. And that's for all of us. We do that because God's grace is sufficient for us. Just what we need, just enough. Grace does make some folks grumble. If they'd have done it, I'd been better off if they'd have done it this way. They'd have done that. You know, armchair quarterbacks are aplenty these days. But God's grace is sufficient for even that. To allow us to see the love of God to be revealed to us and through us for the world around us. Enjoy, sever, let it grow within us, that grace and love, that we may be God's people in the world, to celebrate God's goodness given to us and to all the world. Oh, glory, honor, and power be to the one who was, who is, and who is to come. Amen.